Before you ever turned a key in an ignition, before you ever sat behind a steering wheel, before you ever changed your own oil or replaced a spark plug or opened a hood and knew what you were looking at, you saw inside an engine. You were 12 years old. It was made of clear plastic. The pistons moved, the spark plugs lit up, and your father was standing behind you, watching you understand something for the first time that he had understood his whole life. That was the visible V-8. And if you built one, you never forgot the night it first turned on. Before we dive in, hit subscribe and drop a comment letting us know where you are watching from. The box was big, bigger than any model kit box you had ever held. 22 inches long, almost 17 inches wide, heavy, and on the front was a painting that stopped you before you even opened it. A father in a button-down shirt and a suit jacket, pipe in his mouth, standing behind his teenage son, looking over the boy's shoulder at a completed visible V8 engine on the desk. The father was proud, the son was proud, and the engine between them, transparent, gleaming, every piston and valve and wire visible through the clear plastic, was the reason they were both smiling. One man on the internet looked at that box 50 years later and asked a question that every boy who built one already knew the answer to. Did that ever actually happen anywhere? Did some dad somewhere wearing a tie and jacket really sit down and build this with his kid? Yes, it did. In thousands of homes, on thousands of kitchen tables, on thousands of Saturday afternoons, when a father and a son sat across from each other with 100 pieces of clear plastic between them and built something together that neither of them would ever forget. You opened the box. The parts were organized in bags and on sprues, but there were more of them than you expected. Over 100. Pistons, connecting rods, a crankshaft, rocker arms, push rods, valve springs, a camshaft, a distributor, an oil pump, an intake manifold, exhaust headers, a water pump, a fan, all of it in clear plastic or in painted plastic for the parts that needed to be visible as separate components. The instruction booklet was thick, not a folded sheet like an Aurora Monster kit, but a real booklet with diagrams and part numbers and step-by-step assembly instructions that assumed you could read and follow and that you were serious about this. Because this was not a toy. Not really. It was a model of an actual engine, 1/4 scale, every part in the correct position, every relationship between parts accurate. The crankshaft drove the connecting rods drove the pistons, the camshaft opened the valves, the distributor sent the spark in the right order. It was a textbook made of plastic, a lesson made of parts. And the lesson was, this is how a car works. This is what happens when you turn the key. This is the machine that takes you to school and takes your father to work and takes your family on vacation and sits under the hood of every car on every road in America. And you are going to build it yourself, piece by piece, until you understand it. You started with the crankshaft. You mounted it in the block, the clear plastic block that would let you see everything once it was assembled. You attached the connecting rods. You slid the pistons into the cylinders. This was the part where you held your breath, because the fit had to be right, tight enough that the piston moved smoothly, but not so tight that it jammed. You learned tolerance. Not the human kind, the engineering kind, the kind that means the difference between something that works and something that seizes up and never moves again. The camshaft went in next, then the push rods, then the rocker arms, then the valve springs. Each part was small, some no bigger than your thumbnail, and each part had to go in the right place and face the right direction. You dropped a valve spring and it rolled under the refrigerator, and you got a flashlight and a ruler and fished it out, and it took 10 minutes, and you did not complain, because this was the most important thing you had ever built. Your father helped, or your father watched, or your father took over for the hard parts and handed it back to you for the parts you could do. It depended on the father. Some fathers could not keep their hands off it. They had worked on real engines their whole lives, and the visible V8 was a chance to show their son what they knew. They pointed at the crankshaft and said, "That is what converts up and down motion to rotation." And the boy nodded, even if he did not fully understand, because his father was talking to him like an adult, and that alone was worth the price of the kit. Some fathers sat back and let the boy figure it out, stepping in only when a part would not fit or a screw was too tight or the frustration started to show in the boy's jaw. Some fathers just sat in the room and read the newspaper and drank their coffee and looked up when the boy said, "Dad, look." and saw the pistons moving for the first time and said something that the boy would remember for the rest of his life, even if the father never remembered saying it. The exhaust headers went on, the intake manifold, the carburetor on top, a miniature version of the device that mixed air and fuel. And even though the model did not mix anything, you understood the concept. Air comes in here, fuel meets it here. The mixture goes into the cylinder here, the spark plug ignites it here, the explosion pushes the piston down. The piston turns the crankshaft turns the wheels. That is how a car moves. And you learned it not from a book, but from putting together 100 pieces of plastic on a kitchen table while your father drank coffee and watched you become someone who understood machines. The distributor was the part that connected everything. A miniature rotor inside a miniature cap wired to 8 miniature spark plugs. When the engine turned, the rotor spun and sent an electrical pulse to each plug in sequence. Not randomly, in order. The firing order of a V-8, 1, 5, 4, 2, 6, 3, 7, 8. You did not know that number before you built the visible V-8. You knew it after. You knew it the way you knew your phone number, automatically, permanently, without thinking. 50 years later, a man can rattle off the firing order of a V-8 because he watched miniature light bulbs glow in sequence on a kitchen table in 1964. The electric motor was hidden in the starter. That was the genius of the design. The starter looked like a starter mounted on the side of the block, but inside it was a small electric motor connected to batteries. When you flipped the switch, the starter motor engaged the crankshaft, just like in a real car, and everything moved. The crankshaft turned. The connecting rods pushed the pistons up and down. The camshaft rotated and opened the valves. The distributor spun and sent a tiny electrical pulse to each spark plug in the correct firing order. And the spark plugs, miniature light bulbs, one in each cylinder, lit up one at a time, in sequence, like a real engine firing. That was the moment. You had spent hours, maybe days, maybe a weekend, maybe 2 weekends assembling this thing, cutting parts from sprues, following diagrams, fitting pieces together, testing motion, adjusting clearance, and now you flipped a switch and the engine that you built with your own hands came alive in front of you. The pistons went up and down, the crankshaft spun, the spark plugs glowed in order, 1, 5, 4, 2, 6, 3, 7, 8, the firing order of a V-8 which you had never known before and would never forget after. And through the transparent walls of the cylinder block, you could see all of it, every movement, every connection, every cause and every effect. You understood in that moment what was happening under the hood of every car you had ever ridden in. You understood what your father did when he opened the hood on a Saturday morning and leaned in with a wrench. You understood what the mechanic at the gas station was looking at when he said, "It's the timing," or "You need new plugs," or "The valves need adjusting." You understood because you could see it, and seeing is understanding. You took it to school, you brought it for show and tell or for science class, and you set it on the teacher's desk and you turned it on and the whole class watched. The pistons moved, the spark plugs lit up. The teacher asked you to explain how it worked, and you did. You pointed at the crankshaft and the connecting rods and the camshaft and the distributor, and you explained the 4-stroke cycle: intake, compression, power, exhaust. You were 12 years old and you were teaching your class how an internal combustion engine works because you had built one with your own hands on a Saturday afternoon, and the knowledge lived in your fingers as much as in your brain. Some schools bought visible V-8s for their science departments. Some auto shop teachers used them as teaching aids, a way to show students the inside of an engine without tearing apart a real one. The visible V-8 was in classrooms across America, not because it was a toy, but because it was the single best teaching tool ever made for explaining how a car engine works. Better than a diagram, better than a textbook, better than a lecture, because it moved. You could watch it and understand in 30 seconds what a diagram takes 30 minutes to explain. The company that made this was called Renwal. The name was a puzzle. Renwal is Lawner spelled backward. Irving Lawner founded the company in the late 1930s in New York City. He started by selling plastic kitchenware, bowls, cups, containers. He had no intention of making model kits, but plastic was the future, and the future had a way of pulling people toward things they did not expect. The man who designed the Visible series was not Irving Lawner. He was a man named Marcel Jovine, an Italian soldier who had been captured during World War II and brought to America as a prisoner of war. When the war ended, Jovine stayed. He became an American. He became a sculptor and designer. And in 1958, he designed a transparent model of a V-8 engine that would teach more American boys how cars work than every auto shop class in the country combined. An Italian prisoner of war. That is who gave your father's generation the gift of understanding what was under the hood. A man who came to this country in chains and stayed to make things out of clear plastic that showed children how machines work. That is the kind of story that America does not tell often enough. The visible V-8 was so successful that Renwal built an entire world around it. The visible automobile chassis came in 1963, a complete car frame with working clutch, shiftable transmission, working brakes, and steering. The V-8 engine slid right into it. You could build an entire car and see every part working. They made the visible man, a transparent human body with removable organs that taught anatomy the way the V-8 taught engineering. The visible woman followed, and in a detail that could only have happened in the 1950s, the box assured parents that the miracle of creation pregnancy feature was entirely optional and came in its own separate box. They made a visible horse, a visible head, even a visible pigeon. The visible V-8 was so respected that Chrysler, a real automobile manufacturer, took notice. When Chrysler heard that Revell was planning to make a transparent model of a Chevrolet small block V-8 to compete with Renwal's kit, Chrysler stepped in and convinced Revell to make a cutaway slant 6 instead. A real car company cared enough about a model kit to interfere with a competitor's product plan. That is how seriously the visible V-8 was taken. It was not a toy, it was a tool, and the auto industry knew it. Renwal did not survive. The company that made plastic kitchenware and then made the most famous model engine kit in history went under. The molds were sold to Revell, and Revell still sells a visible V-8 today, but it is not the same. The electric motor is gone, replaced by a hand crank. The light-up spark plugs are gone. The firing order sequence that taught a generation of boys how ignition works, gone. The kit that was once a working machine is now a static display with a handle you turn by hand. A man on a collector's forum wrote about the modern version and said, "I really don't understand why they cheapened it. These features were key to the appeal." He is right. The features were the appeal. The motor that turned the crankshaft was the appeal. The spark plugs that lit up in sequence were the appeal. The fact that it worked, that you flipped a switch and an engine came alive, was everything. Without those features, the visible V-8 is just a clear plastic model of an engine. With them, it was a window into a world that every boy wanted to enter and that many boys entered because of it. A man on the Haggerty forum wrote, "I built the visible V-8 in the late 1960s. It inspired me to become a mechanic in the 70s. Another man on Mac's Motor City Garage wrote, "My dad built one for me when I was just learning the basics of modeling. Gave me a basic understanding of how engines worked, and I attribute some of my love for classic car restoration to this model and my dad, to this model and my dad." Those 6 words contain the entire story of the visible V-8. It was never about the plastic. It was never about the pistons or the spark plugs or the transparent cylinder block. It was about a father and a son sitting at a table with 100 pieces of clear plastic between them, building something together that the son would carry with him for the rest of his life. The model taught him how engines work. His father taught him how to build. And the 2 lessons became one, inseparable, stored in the same memory, retrieved every time he opens a hood or picks up a wrench or hears an engine turn over and thinks of a kitchen table on a Saturday afternoon in 1965. There is one more comment, one that you need to read. A man on the Haggerty forum wrote, "I still have an unbuilt Renwal visible V-8 that I bought my son for his birthday for us to build together. I was divorced from his mom. It never got built. And my son passed away several years ago. I am not sure what I want to do with it now. An unbuilt kit, a father and a son who never got to sit at the table. A box that is still sealed because the person he was going to open it with is gone. That man has a visible V-8 that will never be built. And every man who did build one, who did sit at that table, who did have that Saturday afternoon, who did flip the switch and watch the pistons move and the spark plugs light up and heard his father say something he never forgot. Every one of those men realized how lucky he was. The original visible V-8, the one with the electric motor and the light-up spark plugs and the magic of watching an engine come alive, sells for $500 on eBay today. The box with the father and the pipe and the son and the smile sells for more than the kit itself because the box is the promise. The promise that a father and a son could sit at a table and build something together that would teach the son how the world works. And the father would stand behind him, pipe in his mouth, jacket on his shoulders, proud. That promise is what Renwal sold for $4.98 in 1958. And it was the best deal in the history of American toys. You are sitting here right now, and you are thinking about the table, not the kit, the table. The kitchen table or the workbench or the card table that your father set up in the basement. You are thinking about the way he held the flashlight while you tightened a screw, the way he said careful when you were pressing a piston into a cylinder, the way he smelled, coffee and aftershave and something mechanical like oil or metal that was just him. You are thinking about the moment the switch flipped and the engine turned and the pistons moved and the spark plugs glowed and you looked at each other and you both knew that something had been built that afternoon that had nothing to do with plastic. Every man who built a visible V-8 with his father built two things that day. He built an engine and he built a memory that no amount of time or distance or loss can take apart. The pistons still move. The spark plugs still glow. The father is still standing behind him, the kitchen table is still there, and the clear plastic engine on the desk, the one that taught him how cars work and how fathers teach, and how some things that cost $4.98 are worth more than anything money can buy, that engine is still running. It is still running right now, in your head, where nobody can cheapen it, where nobody can replace the motor with a hand crank, where nobody can remove the spark plugs that light up in order, where the original, your original, is still exactly the way it was on the night you built it with your father and flipped the switch and watched it come alive. That was the visible V-8, and it is still the best thing you ever built.